Hey, everybody, it's Mo, and I always grin from ear to ear. I know, I get it, but but I always have somebody interesting to bring to you, and I've got someone particularly interesting today. Joanne Lipman. Joanne has held really, really high level roles at major periodicals, magazines, things like that. Joanne, I'll have you explain those because I think it's super interesting. But we're going to be talking about reinvention today. We're going to talk about reinventing yourself. All of you are experts. Sometimes you need to reinvent your expertise. Sometimes you need to ladder up an organization, reinvent yourself and your role. Sometimes you need to help people in your organization reinvent their roles, driving more innovation, stretching outside their comfort zone. We're going to cover all that today and more. Joanne, introduce yourself, tell us about your book, and then we'll get into the big idea.
Absolutely. So sure. Mo, first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you. So I'm Joanne Lipman, a longtime veteran journalist, as we say. I spent the first half of my career, 22 years, more than half, at the Wall Street Journal, starting as a reporter, actually starting as a college intern, reporter all the way up through editor. I created Weekend Journal. I created Personal Journal. I became the deputy managing editor, which is in journal terminology is a deputy editor-in-chief. And went from there to Condé Nast, where I created the magazine and was editor-in-chief of Condé Nast Portfolio, the business magazine. And most recently, I was the chief content officer of Gannett, as well as editor-in-chief of USA Today and the USA Today network. So I was overseeing 3,000 plus journalists, obviously USA Today, the flagship, in addition to about 100 plus metro papers, right? Like the Arizona Republic and the Indy Star and the Des Moines Register. And I'm here today because I'm so excited about my new book. This is my third book, and it is called Next, The Power of Reinvention.
I love it. And I think one of the things is I was excited about having you on the show two reasons. One is I wanted to learn from you. The other one is, audience, I've got to make full disclosure. I haven't read Next yet because Joanne and we could schedule this interview before I could get a galley or advanced reader copy, and her book's coming out soon, and you can already buy it on Amazon and things like that. You'll get it in March. Or with the magic of podcasting, you probably can already get it get it tomorrow because we'll debut this right in Joanne's launch week. But what's interesting is I haven't read the book yet. I think it's the first time ever I've had a guest and haven't read the book. So this is going to be a fun journey, Joanne, because you'll guide me. We've prepped, obviously, but you'll guide me to the parts that are interesting. I'll guide you to what I think our audience interested in. And I think it's just going to be a lot of fun. So, okay. So why don't we start with the big idea? Given your background, what I think is so fascinating is how the heck to even choose the topic? Because here you were bombarded by big ideas every year for the past couple decades across all these domains you've been in. And you chose this one. Why is it important? Why do you think people need this content that's in your book Next?
100%. So first of all, let me tell you what Next is. It is a deeply, deeply reported guide to navigating change in how you live, how you work, how you lead, and how to inspire that kind of innovation and creative thinking in others. And the reason why now is because, we are at this moment in time when a lot of people are burned out. A lot of people are looking for more meaning in their career or their work. But a lot of us as leaders are really navigating these seismic changes in the workforce, in the way that we work, and also in our own businesses. And by the way, so that was the impetus, but I will tell you, right now, I think all of us are in this world where we need to pivot, right? We are all asking. That is the conversation of this moment in time. This is the zeitgeist, right? It's what's next. And you asked what inspired it, why now? And I actually was inspired. I have a whole chapter, by the way, on aha moments and where do they come from and how they can change your life and how to have more of them. But I had my own aha moment. It was very early on in the pandemic. And I had one of those things you wake up in the middle of the night because like everybody else, like everybody with a knowledge worker job, I'd been sent back home and was saying, oh my gosh, we got to figure out this new normal. And then it hit me like, we're all going to have to figure out what's next. What is the new normal? And what's really interesting is I had that ideas. And this throughout the pandemic, I did all this reporting to find people who had successfully navigated really significant transitions, reinventions in their work or their business. And what's so interesting is here we are, literally exactly 3 years later after that pandemic started, and we're at a moment where the health crisis has now receded, thankfully. But that search for the new normal, it is as urgent as ever, and maybe even more so.
I totally agree. And just as you were talking, I was thinking through, I've trained like almost 30 or around 30,000 people or more. And I was thinking through, who are the people that have really impressed me? And they're the people who seek out this next thing. They're the people who say, I've had a lot of success at X, but I want to ladder up one level. And just in broad brushes, experts generally first have to learn their craft. Then they have to bolt on learning how to win the business to do their craft. And by doing so, they're in control. They get if they make that transition, they're in control. They get to choose the clients they work with, to do the work they want, to make the impact they want. The next level up is generally becoming helping others make that transition, become a leader of folks who are starting to win the work. And then there's a level above that where you're leading at massive scale. And each one of those steps up is a completely new skill set, and very, very few people make each one. So those are just in general, but there's a million others. So why don't you drop into what you see? What does success look like? What are the secrets to how people navigate whatever change they want to make?
Sure. So let me start by telling you kind of how I did the reporting and the storytelling in Next, which is I started by talking to and seeking out people who had really successfully made major transitions. And by the way, I looked at all different kinds. I mean, quite a few are people who had career reinventions, but I also wanted to seek out people who had come back from crushing failure.
Yeah.
Or people, or people who had these life-changing aha moments, or people who had trauma in their lives that disrupted their entire lives, including their businesses, and had to figure out how do you move on and move forward from that. And I also actually have a chapter, which I call Necessity Entrepreneurs, which is women, people of color, and increasingly baby boomers who are, not succeeding or are being forced out of or squeezed out of some of the traditional career paths, who need to reinvent their own careers. So I interviewed across the board these really interesting, we can talk about some of the case studies, but really interesting people. And then what I did is I spoke to the experts who study each one of these kinds of transitions. And what's so cool, Mo, is that the experts in each field are very different and they don't talk to each other. So you can talk to management gurus, which I did all over, who study career transitions. And then you can talk to psychologists who talk about trauma. And then I spoke with neuroscientists who study what happens in your brain when you have a eureka moment. And I asked them all to explain the transitions that I was seeing, like how did this happen and what made it successful? So here's the super cool thing I found, which I was not expecting when I went into this. Every one of these experts would describe to me in their own language, with their own terminology, here's what it takes, and they would walk me through the steps. And I started charting it as one does. And I realized that even though they were using different language, they were all describing the exact same process. And so in Next, I kind of boiled down that process. It's 4 stages generally. And I can walk you through that quickly, and then we can talk a little bit about that. Does that work for you?
You've had me at every word these last couple of minutes. I'm like, give me the secrets, Joanne. And I know the audience, right now, there's somebody driving down the highway. They're like, Joanne, give me the secrets. Let's go.
Okay, so the 4 stages common to all these kinds of transitions, I call them the search, struggle, stop.
Okay, slow down. Let's
solution.
Go through those again.
So very
search,
briefly.
Struggle. Yep. Got it.
Stop, solution. And I will go through each step very quickly, and then we can show sort of how it works in action. So the search, this is step 1. This is when you're transitioning to something new, but generally for almost everyone I interviewed, they didn't realize it yet. It's you're collecting information and you're vacuuming up all kinds of information that are going to play a major role in your transition. For most of the people I spoke to, it was an unintentional step. They didn't quite realize what they were doing. Sometimes, it was a hobby or some random interest. Sometimes it was a side hustle. But in any case, so that's your first step.
And just stopping there, because now if I got it right, the person doesn't realize they need to make a change. So are they driven just by passion or they're inspired in some way. Why are we searching or collecting this information?
Yeah, generally it's just something that is
Okay.
an interest of yours, right? It's a passion or an interest. It's not necessarily anything you would even
Yeah.
think of as a career, and it may only be tangentially related.
You're
It
just
just
like,
catches your
I'm just
interest. So
replaying
that's
my own life chapters. And okay, so keep going because I'm seeing myself in just step one already. Keep going. So now we're at the struggle.
So now we're at the struggle. So the struggle, this is a really key part. So the struggle is when you start to disconnect yourself from your initial
Mm,
work or identity or career, whatever it is. You start to disconnect, but you haven't gotten to where you're going yet. Now the struggle can be super uncomfortable. Nobody wants to struggle. And the other thing is we never talk about this when we're talking about these career transitions. It
yeah.
always seems to be overnight. Like Mark Zuckerberg goes from college kid to tech billionaire, right? Like
Yep.
it's Cinderella stories. And we don't talk about this middle part, but we all go through it when we are transitioning. And we always think it's only us, but it's not. It's everybody. And it can last quite a while or it can last just a short amount of time. But whatever it is, it's
Are
generally
the
an uncomfortable part.
are the
So
unlocks in
this
the struggle sort of starting to realize this thing I've been doing doesn't work, or you could also have great success and you're trying to go up a level, or like you said, maybe there's some cataclysmic blow, crushing blow. But what what's going on in the mind and the struggle that's disconnecting you from the past?
So very often in a career sense, it's either because you're dissatisfied with your career. And so
Mhm.
for example, with the pandemic, if you look at the research on people in the pandemic who left their jobs or were looking for new jobs, every piece of research I saw said the majority of people, particularly younger people like millennials and definitely the Gen Zers, but the majority of people are actually looking outside of their career paths. So it may be that they're
Yep.
reprioritizing, they've had this moment to think about it. It could also be that there's seismic changes in their own industry. I mean, my
Yep.
industry, journalism, right? 2,000 plus newspapers have closed in the last few years. So people are kind of need to think about
Yep.
how else can I use these
Yep.
skills. So that's your struggle. So you're realizing you're
Yep.
leaving behind the old identity. You have
Yeah.
not
And just
gotten to the new one. Now,
if I
very
if I can
often,
give an
Mhm.
example to the audience, just to really put a fine point on it, I'm thinking of about it was 10 or 12 years ago. We were doing a training at a high performing law firm, and one of the women in the group is incredibly successful already. But she said, "You know what's going to be really successful over the next couple decades is cybersecurity, and I want to get out in front of that." This might have been 15 years ago, actually. Like nobody was talking about law and cybersecurity. It wasn't even a thing people talked about. But she's like, I want to go and plant a flag and be known as the best in the world at that. And it sounds obvious now, but at the time it was sort of crazy. Like, well, why would you give up all the success that you have? And I could hear her in that class almost debate back and forth. Well, should I put an extra hour here? Should I put an extra hour there? And she did. And it has, I'm just talking to the audience now, Joanne, not you, but it unlocked so much for her that she took that risk. And I remember the conversation in the room about, you could almost hear her in the moment go back and forth in the struggle, like, I'm already successful. Should I take a risk and go after this other thing? And I heard it firsthand, and then I heard it pay off through what I'm guessing is stop and solution. But back to you, because I think these happen all the time. And I think what I'm taking away from what you're saying is when you hear the struggle in your head, pay attention because it could be a big unlock for something else. Is that right? Yeah.
Huge. That is 100% true. And not only that, when you have the struggle in your head and it feels terrible and
Mm,
it feels like you're treading water, know that you are not. You're actually moving forward. I think that's a real key. And it made me feel so much better about my own life and my own career
yeah.
once I understood that.
Go.
So let me get to step 3. So step 3 is the stop. Now, the stop is not every person will go through the stop, but I will tell you that in the majority of cases, and I interviewed a lot of people, the majority of them had a stop moment. Now, the stop could be something that you decide. It could be, I quit my job, right? But the stop could also be something that is forced on you. So it could be you lose your job, you're laid off. It could be,
Yep.
an illness or, some other cataclysmic event in your own life, or it could be a pandemic that strikes all of us. And what the stop does is it actually, because it takes you out of your routine and it completely stops us in our tracks. And what it allows that to do is all of this seemingly unrelated material that's been swimming around in our heads that we've been collecting in the search and in the struggle, it coalesces. And we have that moment. It's either the aha moment or it's just the realization that it's time to pivot. And that is what leads ultimately to the fourth step, which is the solution.
Yeah. And you're making me think of, I forget who I learned this from and I completely stole it, the idea from somebody else, but it's been really valuable to me is I have an hour on my calendar every quarter. It just repeats forever. And in that time, I do some planning for the next quarter. One of the most critical moments is I go and find 50 to 100 hours I spent in the prior quarter that I want to stop doing because it made sense maybe at the time or it was a habit or whatever. But it metaphorically in my mind, I see a ladder, which is if I want to climb up to the next rung, I have got to let go my bottom foot, whichever foot I've got to let go of a whatever I was standing on before, get uncomfortable. And to climb up, you've got to let go. To climb, you have to climb, you have to cut.
Exactly.
We could say it that way. And just forcing myself to have a stop once a quarter, I found that's the right cadence for me. And just go and find 50 or 100 hours, minimum 50 and sometimes higher. That's been a big unlock for me because it keeps this sort of stop idea happening consistently, if that makes sense.
100%. It really makes sense. And not only that, what's really interesting about this particular moment in time is that we all have these big moments of transition and go through these steps. And by the way, you may go through them multiple times in your life and throughout your career. And sometimes you go one step forward and one step backward. But what's interesting is generally this has been an individual principle, right? It's your life. It's what's happening in your life or my life. What happened 3 years ago is it happened to all of us all at once. With the pandemic, gave us a giant stop for all of us. And I think that's one of the reasons why, if you look at the research, you see so many people are rethinking their careers, rethinking their businesses because of, and thinking this is time, this is a great time, or they're having really great brainwaves, like, great new ideas to go toward. But if you'd like, we could walk through an example or two.
Well, let's dig a little deeper in the solution because I feel like I sort of got it, but go a bit deeper in that and then we'll get some examples.
Yeah, sure. So the solution generally comes about, it is the fruition, it is the realization of everything you've been doing. So the solution is generally where you are pivoting to. And it is not always where you expect to go. That was another big takeaway for me in my research. I was brought up, I spent years at the Wall Street Journal. I've read all of the classic business books. And if you think about, Think and Grow Rich, those kind of classic books, what is the advice we get? The advice we get is set that goal and work backwards and work toward that goal. Now that works for some people, certainly. If you want to be, if you want to be a managing director at an investment bank and that's your goal, you're going to have to major in finance and go to business school. Like, you can plot that out, right? There is a path. And so that makes sense. But for most of the people who I spoke with, I would say for many, many of the people I spoke with, they had no idea where they would end up. It was their interest that taught them, that took them there. And I found that to be absolutely fascinating and also very reassuring. Particularly, I think about young people who are like, I don't know what I want to do, or, I don't like my job, but I'm not sure what career I want to move into. It was very reassuring to me that there is this pathway. And some of the places people ended up were just incredibly unexpected. I could walk you through a couple. Let me give you one of my favorite unexpected
I think this is super
twists.
Interesting, by the way. And just to say it out loud, like, because the search starts with sort of a passion or something somebody finds interesting, by definition, I'm assuming the end result is like deeply meaningful and something they're super excited about. Even if it wasn't the path they charted early on, I'm guessing that's where we come up with. So give it to me. Give
exactly. Some examples. Yeah. Okay, so this was one of my favorites. I met in the Hudson Valley there. I met a farmer. He's a cattle farmer. And I spent a couple days tagging after and watching him move the cows from one pasture to another and fix the fences and deal with all that kind of stuff. And do the hay. Anyway, he's a great guy. It's beef cattle, and I have tasted his goods, and oh my gosh, it's like the best beef you will ever eat, hamburgers and brisket. Anyway, but his name is Will Brown, and his farm is called Lowland Farm. And you would never know if you met Will Brown today that he actually, the first 30 years of his career, he was a Harvard-trained economist at JP Morgan, working in New York and London. And I said, okay, just walk me through what happened here. And the first thing he said is, well, first of all, I did not set out to be a farmer. Like, that would be ridiculous. And and he explained what happened was, when he was a young banker, young family, had little kids, and he and his wife were looking for an inexpensive weekend house. They find this ramshackle farm that's inexpensive in Warwick, New York, in the Hudson Valley. And so they buy it as a weekend place. And his wife, who at the time was a research psychologist at NYU, she said, we can buy this place on one condition: we never have animals. And he's like, sure,
Certainly
no problem.
not cattle, because that's not going to happen.
No problem. So, it's their weekend getaway, and they go up there, and it had some land, it has acreage around it. And so they leased the land to a farmer who had a very small herd of cattle, like 16 head of cattle. And they went up for a number of years. But over time on the weekends, he would just sort of watch the farmer, actual cattle farmer at work. And he was there when they birthed the cows. And he said, and I learned how to castrate cows when they're born. I did not know that was a thing. He kind of learned by osmosis, not trying, but he was just around. When the cows escaped, he helped herd them back in. But over time, what happened was he started purchasing more land actually to protect the countryside, which was, he did it as a good deed, but he got more and more acreage. And then the cattle farmer died, and there were only 16 cows. And he said, they're just grazing on our land. How hard can that be? And so they had 16 cows. And then he realized it was kind of hard. And not only that, as he said, cows have calves. And so suddenly he's got more and more, and they're multiplying. And so over time, he starts spending a little bit more time on the farm, and he actually is really intrigued by the business. He said, as an economist, this is a whole soup to nuts small business. And he said, JP Morgan, I'm a cog. Like, I am one piece of this giant enterprise on the farm. I get everything, and I love the process. I love problem solving. And it was really interesting. Anyway, it became more and more time consuming, and he spent more time on the farm. And he left JP Morgan and was a consultant. And ultimately, he and his wife realized that they came to that stop, right? They realized they had to make a decision because the farm was so time consuming at that point. And they, was it city life or was it farm life? And they talked it over, and farm life won, and they became full-time farmers. And I'm telling you, he was a very happy guy. But as he said, this was never in the playbook. And as he said, it would be very foolish to leave banking and go right to be a farmer. He said, I had years of training, and I moved very slowly on the weekends. It was a real benefit to learn. So he was searching, in other words, for quite a while before he even thought about this becoming
that's
a
a super interesting story. And it reminds me of the classic Steve Jobs quote where you can connect the dots looking backwards, but you can't looking forwards. Like, I would imagine all of his training as an economist, investment maker, all those things. And I can't even imagine the dashboards he's got running a cattle farm. It's probably pretty insane about how it's optimized for every single metric that you could think of. Yeah,
absolutely. And he just loved the process. He said it's running a small business. He said it could be this, it could be a factory, but he just loved problem solve. He uses his economist brain. By the way, this is another thing I found, another takeaway from Next. What I found when I spoke to all of these people is even when you think that you're sort of in the middle of everything in that struggle period that we're talking about, you're moving forward. And not only that, when you look back from where you've moved to, you realize nothing is wasted. You use everything. And to him, there's not that much difference between what he was doing and what he's doing now, other than now he gets the whole soup to nuts responsibility for it. But it's problem solving, it's economics, it's understanding, the food chain, literally, and the supply chain and everything else, right? So he uses everything.
Well,
I'll give you one other quick
can I ask
example
a
of somebody
specific
else.
question? Because I'm
Yeah,
like,
sure.
so I see
Absolutely.
in the struggle period, there's one scenario I see over and over again with our clients and podcast listeners and watchers. And it's somebody that's got a deep expertise. So they're already typically pretty darn successful, but they see a trend in the industry and they want to sort of shift from being known for this to being known for that. Sort of the Phyllis example I gave before of the high-end lawyer. She's amazingly successful and inspirational. But this can happen in high-end commercial insurance brokerage or management consultants or all kinds of different ways. We see a trend. And where I see people hesitate is they say, well, gosh, Mo, say we're in a training class, they'll say, I'm already known for this. The now pays my bills. I'm very successful. I'm the top X in my firm at whatever. They're usually generally the best of the best that see these trends. And then they stop themselves and think, well, if I start being known in the marketplace for this, it's going to harm my future, would harm my now. And the metaphor we use a lot of times is don't think of it like an on-off light switch. Think of it like a dimmer switch. You're going to start playing around and giving some speeches, talks, writing some articles, client alerts, whatever in this new area, but you can still keep working in the area that you're in. What's your advice for somebody like that they see it, they feel the passion. When I hear it in their voice, I know they want to start pointing their career over there, and they hesitate because it's almost like they're on a trapeze and they're afraid of let go of the bar they're on to go grab the next one. What would you say to them?
First of all, I love the advice that you just gave. That is so true. You can continue to do what you're doing while starting to move, do the speeches on the side or take the class. I have a chapter in next that's called Move Before You Move.
Yeah, keep going.
And that is all about exactly what you were just referring to, which is you're in one career, but you can start to pivot while you are still 100% in your one career. This is your search stage. That's exactly what you're describing as the search stage. And there's a few things that you can do. I mean, clearly on a practical basis, take a class, give a speech, right?
Yeah.
Take action, because I actually have a set of steps at the end, the last chapter of Next, where I distill the advice from all the people and the experts. And so I can give you like 3 pieces that they mentioned that refer exactly to what you're talking about. So one is, so I would say the very first step is imagine possible selves. I don't know if you've heard this phrase before. It is a phrase there's a couple of psychologists, Hazel Marcus and Paula Neurius, who came up with this phrase, possible selves. And that is, the first step is sort of imagining yourself in this new role, thinking about who you might or could be. But thinking about your possible self is not enough. You need to, as you said, take action. You need to don't keep it in your head, right? So there are things that you can do, whether it's shadowing someone, doing the speeches, writing an article or a post, and also sharing those goals. So there's a lot of research out there that shows that if you share your goals with someone else, particularly if you write down those goals and share them with someone else, you are far, far, far more likely to execute on them, right? So that's the first.
And could I put a pin in that to build?
Yes.
You may know Marissa King. She was at Yale, now is at Penn, amazing researcher. And she's shared that all the literature shows asking for advice is incredibly bonding. It creates a mutually beneficial relationship. The old line of thinking is we help people we like. Of course, that's true, but we also like people we help. So by sharing goals with somebody and asking a simple question, something like, hey, these are my goals. What would you do if you were me? Not only do you're more committed to it, like you said, but you're also likely to get some really good ideas, and it's highly correlated to likability. So I just wanted to do that build. Okay, keep going.
Okay, I love what you just said so much because it ties exactly into my next second recommendation, which is to reach out to your weak ties and your dormant ties. So there's a lot of research on this as well. So just to define the terms, though, I bet your listeners already know, your weak ties are people who you know tangentially, right? It's like, I know that Mo's sister-in-law works at a company I'm interested in. And so I'm going to ask, I'm going to see if I can get connected to her. That's your weak ties. Dormant ties are really interesting and super powerful. And these are the people who you may have known in the past, but aren't really in touch with. You worked with them 2 jobs ago or went
Yep.
to college with them, whatever it is, right? When you reach out to those people, as opposed to in our own circle. So when we talk to people in our own circle, it's self-affirming, but it's a bubble, right? And so we're kind of talking to ourselves. We're not really getting a lot of new knowledge. But the research will show you that when you reach out to those weak and dormant ties, that's a gold mine. That is where the majority of people in a survey that was done, it was initially done 50 years ago, but LinkedIn actually just did a very recent survey, crunched the numbers on its own people, and found that the majority of people got new jobs as a result of these weak or dormant ties. There was another really cool experiment where current executives were given a task, which was take a business problem you're trying to solve and call up somebody or email somebody who is a dormant tie, who you haven't spoken to in at least like 3 or 4 years, go back to them and share your problem with them. And the solutions were fantastic. So the executive said that the solutions were far more creative. They were far more actionable. They were just better solutions. But they also said, I thought this was an interesting sidelight. They also said it was a very economical way to get great advice because they had a shared history. So there wasn't a lot of hemming and hawing and getting to know you. Like when you're reaching out to somebody you don't know at all, they could, boom, pick it up right where they left off. So great way.
Yeah, just
very
brilliant.
good advice.
And I've been we've been going back and forth a lot, but actually now I just want you to keep going. So was that the second? That was the second idea. So the first one's, so imagine
that was number 2.
And take action is 1. And then 2, reach out to your weak and dormant ties.
Yep.
Start spreading the word, start asking for advice, start telling people what your goals are, get ideas, things like that. Okay.
Yep. I'll give you a third, and that is what I call expert companion. Talk to an expert companion. And this is somewhat related to what we've been talking about, but very, very often when you're transitioning to something new, we all have talents and skills. We all have our own sets of talents and skills that are so innate that we kind of discount them. We don't even necessarily know what they are. So I borrowed this phrase, expert companion, actually from trauma psychologists. So just a very brief diversion for 1 sec, which is in trauma, we're all familiar with post-traumatic stress. But I talked to these really, really pioneering trauma psychologists, Richard Tedeschi, among them. Richard Tedeschi is amazing, who came up with this idea of post-traumatic growth. And he and his research partners started by interviewing people who had gone through terrible trauma and then asking them, 3 and 5 and 7 years later about, how they were doing versus before. And they found that along with post-traumatic stress, that very often these people had growth. And the kinds of growth they said is, I now am open to more things. I feel like more in control of my life. Like there's a whole set of these things where they feel like they've grown in many ways. And to get to this post-traumatic growth, the psychologist concluded, you need an expert companion. What an expert companion does, and it could be a professional like a therapist or a coach, but an expert companion can also just be somebody who knows you well. And what they do is they can reflect back to you, where are your strengths? Where is the progress you're making? They have an objective view of you and your skills. I took that and I'm like, oh my gosh, we all need an expert companion, every one of us, right? And I found that was very common among the people who I interviewed, that there was somebody out there who saw in them something they did not see in themselves. So I think it's great, whether it's a coach, a lot of people have career coaches who can fill that role, but it could also just be, a friend, a colleague, a spouse who can see that in you. So, I had that myself, actually. For me, it was my husband who, I was at the Wall Street Journal for a long time. I loved being there. I had a great job and more to come and had no desire to leave. And when Condé Nast, Sinu House, who runs Condé Nast, came to me and said, come here and start a new magazine, a new business magazine. And it was so enticing. But at the same time, I was like, I don't want to leave a job that I love. But on the other hand, and I just literally for 2 months, I was sort of paralyzed after this offer came in. And finally, my husband, who did not give me advice on what to do. This is really important about an expert companion. They don't tell you what to do. But what my husband said to me, he reflected back to me. What my husband said to me was, when I see you talk about your current job and I see you talk about this mythical, non-existent magazine that you could create, he said, when I see you talk about the magazine, your physical affect changes. I see this
Wow.
excitement in your face. I hear it in your voice. And he said, you may not realize it, but I can see that. And
Yeah.
that was what I needed to say, okay,
Yeah.
the right move,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Oh,
It
that's
was a
super
really
cool. That's
amazing
my
moment.
favorite story so far is your own. And just that, I'll bet that hit you. It's probably almost a simple conversation over cocktail, driving down the road or whatever, but I bet it hit you like a ton of bricks. And you're like, wow,
It
that
sure
is what
did.
I'm excited about. That's super cool. Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
the turning point.
Yeah.
That was the moment where I
Yeah.
said, okay, I'm doing this. And yeah. So again, very often we don't see it in ourselves. So that's it. And I'm going to give you, that's 3. I
Go.
want to give you one
Yeah.
bonus
Do it.
one.
Do it. Do
Can
it.
I
Well,
give you a bonus?
let me
Okay.
just say this to the audience.
Yeah, sure.
That imagine your possible self and take action. Number 1. Number 2, reach out to weak and dormant ties. Number 2, find an expert companion that can reflect back. Number 3, that is gold, audience. So if you're one of these people that is thinking, I'm already successful, that's the dang problem, is where you're already successful, which most of the folks we work with really are. They're used to getting A+ on every test. They're 99th percentile. We're work with the best of the best. So audience, you can pat yourself on the back. You're the best of the best. You're in the right place. That is sometimes the biggest problem because you're already having massive success. What I would challenge everybody to do is say, what could be better? What are you searching around? What are you struggling around, to use Joanne's terms, around where's that passion, and how could you start to move forward in this very simple, practical, and valuable 3-step process? So I would really encourage everybody to do that. Okay, Joanne, back to you. Bonus story time.
Bonus. Okay. And this, I love this one, which is listen to your gut. And this can be counterintuitive. At one of the things, I interviewed a lot of executives. And over time, obviously in my career, spending so much time as a business journalist, I have been steeped in talking with executives. And I know that they have tons and tons and tons of data flowing at them all the time, as did I when I was at Gannett, Chief Content Officer, tons of data. But what the research will show you is that when senior executives, CEOs and CFOs are making decisions, they actually tune out a large portion of the data and they go with their gut. And the reason behind that is no matter how much data you have, it is incomplete. So that's reason number 1. But reason number 2 is because your gut feeling, while you might be afraid of your gut, generally most of the time, not always, so you got to be careful about this, but most of the time your gut feeling actually does not come out of nowhere. What the researchers have found is successful gut feeling is actually an accumulation of research, an accumulation of data points that are in your brain that you may not have necessarily connected consciously, but that subconsciously your body and brain have actually accumulated this knowledge. I mean, it's the same reason, for example, why chess players, really expert chess players, can play that 3-dimensional chess, or they can do that thing where they play 25 people all at once. It's because they have this story. They don't have to think, right? It's all in their head. But those of us who become expert in our areas in business, we have that too in our own areas and can apply that.
I love it.
Don't be afraid of your gut.
It totally makes sense. So, okay. So here's where I want to take things. I've got one last super open-ended question on next. And then I want to dig into Joanne, because I just find your energy and the passion, the super cool, interesting things you've done in your life. I think how you run your life is going to be interesting to the audience too. And as you saw in the preview, we got a couple of questions coming on that. But one last one on next before we get to Joanne. I want you to tell us the most interesting thing you found across the whole book that you didn't expect.
So I would say there's a couple of myths that this book, the research, really, really exploded for me. And I think I'll there were 2 or 3 that it really exploded, but the one that I actually would love to take on is this Cinderella myth. And I referred to it briefly, but I just would love the audience to think about this for a moment, because think about how we are all brought up. We are brought up on this idea that it should be instant. Like if you're going to have this transformation, right, it should be instant. But, from the time we're kids with Cinderella and the prince, the frog turns into the prince. We're adolescents. we get Superman and Spider-Man who turn into superheroes overnight. We grow up and we're watching reality TV with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, American Idol. Like it's always overnight success. And then the business stories that we tell ourselves and that the business press is reporting on, and I have probably been guilty of this myself in the past, they seem to happen overnight. We just minimize that struggle piece of it. And I think one of the big takeaways and one of the things that just made me feel the best about doing the research when I came out of it was understanding that those myths they're damaging, they're wrong. That struggle and stop part, that middle part is actually where all the work gets done. And one other piece, if I can give one other little bonus piece of what I learned was I am one of those people who would always sort of power through, suck it up. I'm always telling myself, like, just keep going. And I learned the importance, and I'm sure you've talked about this on your podcast before, but wow, did I learn the importance of taking a break. And it's that stop, but it's also just taking breaks during your day. Like, I think about it. I tell the story in the book. I worked with someone, a very successful guy, but I just remember we had to take a business trip together. And we were like powering through conference room after conference room, state after state. I didn't even know where I was. We finally get to the end of the day, get off the plane. It's late. And I said, I've got to get to the hotel and get some sleep. And he says to me, sleep is for suckers. We got to keep going. But he was wrong. He was wrong. And I'm here to prove it. But anyway, I'm sure you've all heard you need to take a break or take a walk or whatever. Can I give a piece of my own productivity hack because it's related to this?
I just have to say a funny story one time, though, that, our first book, The Snowball System, I just elated with the success it's had, things like that. I was camping in the woods with one of my best friends, and he gets up at like 5 a.m. in the woods, and I'd sleep till like 9. And we're in the middle of the woods. He's already up fishing, and I'm still sleeping in the tent. And he's like, you know what your next book ought to be? The Sleepy System. And we had a big laugh over that. But I love sleeping. And I think it's one of the most important things I do. And I embrace the fact that I need lots of sleep. Some people can call me a loser. I don't care. I love sleep.
No, you and me both. There's nothing sweeter than that, right?
All right, give me your
best.
next one. I love it.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do is actually share a hack that I learned that regarding this powering through. There's tons and tons of research. It's all in I have a whole chapter on why you deserve a break today.
I love it.
To quote McDonald's. And there's a lot of research. Taking a walk in the woods, going for a run, anything, right? And there's research that shows that there was actually research that was done on writers and physicists at the same time because they wanted to see, is there a difference between creative brains and very hardwired brains, very analytical brains. And they had them keep a diary of when were their best ideas, and then their ideas were rated. And uniformly, the best ideas came when they were not working. Their best ideas came when they were cleaning or in the shower or in the middle of the night. And there's a neuroscientific reason for that, which I go into in the book. But to move on from that just for a moment to explain this hack that was so genius. So I like I said, I was one of those power through people. And this is my third book. For the first book, I remember this one horrible weekend. It was a holiday weekend. And I had writer's block the worst way. And I literally sat there like 12 hours a day with that cursor blinking on an empty page for 3 days straight. And it was it was just so horrible. And from that moment, I was going to Davos, to the World Economic Forum. And so after that horrible 3 days, I get on a plane. And of course, it was one of those horrible flights where you have to switch planes in the middle of the night. And in the middle of the night, I find myself, in the airport lounge with a guy named Tony Schwartz. Some of your folks may know Tony. Yeah, because he does the Energy Project now. But Tony used to be a journalist. He's actually best known. I mean, he ghost wrote Donald Trump's The Art of the Deal, and later became a big Trump.
I didn't even know that,
critic.
But I think of the powerful engagement and all this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm pouring my heart out, my exhausted heart out to Tony as he's sitting there in the middle of the night saying, I have this terrible writer's block. And he said, you have to try the 90-minute rule. And I don't know if this is something you're aware of, but it's genius. So the 90-minute rule is this. I live by this. The 90-minute rule is when you're working on a project or something particularly that takes a lot of mental energy, like writing a book, you work for 90 minutes completely uninterrupted, and you got to turn off your phone. You don't look at your email or your social media, nothing like that. You have to do it for 90 minutes straight. But at the end of 90 minutes, you must stop. You must. It is a requirement. And then you have to do something else. You have to take a break. And then you do it again. And as Tony said, you're not going to be able to do more than 3 of these a day, which is a total of 4.5 hours, but you will get twice as much done as you could get done in a 12-hour day. And he was right. And there actually is, it turns out there's a whole bunch of science behind this about how our brains work in 90-minute cycles. It's the same thing where we cycle through 90 minutes in sleep with the REM cycle and all that. But in any case, what it does for me is, if I have writer's block or I have some issue like that, I know at the end of 90 minutes I have to stop. So you just like put anything down on paper, right? And you just got to, or I got to get to the end of this paragraph. I got to get to the end of this sentence. And it forces you. And then you have to take that break. And when you have that break, you have that moment when all the ideas swirling in your head have a chance to subconsciously sort of swim together again. And it doesn't matter what you can cook or eat or swim or whatever you want to do. And when you come back again, your brain is refreshed. It's easier to edit or pick up on what you were doing. You can see problems in what you were doing before. And it is true, you can only do it 3 times in a day. And now I'm blanking on the academic's name, I'm sorry to say, but the very, very famous psychologist who did the study that resulted in the 10,000 hours.
Dr. Anders Ericsson. Yep.
Anders Ericsson, thank you very much. Thank you. So Anders Ericsson is very famous because he's the one who did research on violinists and found that you have to practice 10,000 hours before you're an expert. Everybody knows 10,000 hours. Thank you, Malcolm. What they don't know is there was another piece of that research finding. And that research finding was that the expert violinists also practiced for 90 minutes, took a break, practiced for 90 minutes, and they did this 3 times a day. And that was one of the keys of why they also were successful. And he called this deliberate practice. It wasn't just like mindless practicing. It had to be deliberate. And that's what 90 minutes does to you.
There's a great back and forth on a Freakonomics radio podcast before Ericsson passed away. That's so funny because Ericsson says, you got my research wrong. It's not just 10,000 hours. It's not just quantity. It's quality too. It's deliberate practice. And Gladwell goes, no, I got your research right. I'm the one who's right. And it's so funny because Ericsson did the research. I think they're doing it mostly for fun, but it's really neat to hear them go back and forth. But I love that. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, I trained as a young person. I played the viola very seriously. And I studied all the way through college. I actually studied when I was an undergrad at Yale. I also studied at the Yale School of Music, the grad school there. And I can tell you that deliberate practice that I side with Anders Ericsson. He was right.
I agree. Well, this has been amazing. Okay. So I think what I'd like to do is for time, I'm looking at both of our time. I want to just do one last question. So I'm going to skip a couple that you might have seen in our prep, but I'm going to go straight to the fun one, which is, and the audience is excited. People are clapping. It's the super powerful inspirational nudge, spin for short. For audio only listeners, you might be able to hear the tick. We're going to ask Joanne a random question of 10. And it is, I love this one. Joanne, in your own life, what crazy metric do you track that tells you if you're successful or not?
Oh, I love this question. Okay, so as a journalist, right, there are a lot of metrics that you can track, especially now. There's a lot of normal metrics. You're looking at virality and how many clicks do I get and how many people buy my book and all of those kinds of things that are regular, data-centric metrics. The crazy metric that I use is when one of my relatives who could care less about what I do professionally comes to me and has heard about my work, something that, they've heard about my work from another source, from elsewhere.
I love that.
So yeah. One of my favorite moments was, when my mom, who has since passed, but my mom once saw something. She called me up and she said, my friends saw this article about you in Newsweek magazine. And it was like, I'd already had a pretty significant career, but my mother just didn't care, just didn't matter to her at all until her friend told her she saw an article
I think
about
that's,
me.
I love it.
That's
And
my crazy
you've
metric.
deeply impacted the world when people who do know you but don't care. I think that's great. Good. All right. So everybody's going to want to rush out and buy the book next. And if you don't, audience, you need to be thinking that way, because I learned so much, Joanne, and we know I'm sure we just barely scratched the surface. Where should somebody go to learn more about your work, maybe buy the book? What should they do if they want to engage more?
Sure. So the book is called Next, The Power of Reinvention in Life and Work. You can buy it anywhere. I always love to recommend, you obviously can get it on Amazon, but I always love to recommend supporting your local or independent bookstore if you can. And if you want to learn more about me and find out more about the book and my other works, my website is very easy. It's my name, joannelipman.com. And you can find me there too. You can reach me on there as well. You can reach out. And I am on all social media at Joanne Lipman. And I'd love to engage
love it.
with
And
you
Joanne,
there
do you
as
also
well.
do other things besides the writing in the book? Do you do speaking? Do you do things like that as well?
I do quite a bit of speaking. And if you'd like me to have me come and speak to your organization, I would love to do it. It's actually one of my favorite things to do because I feel like I learned so much from these different organizations that I work with. So yeah, I'd love to come and speak with your organization. There's information on my website about how to reach my speaking agents as well as the public relations. So
yeah, you've been so
I'd love to hear from you.
entertaining and engaging. I was trying to could you combine those and engaging? You've been so entertaining and engaging out there. I could see you as just an amazing speaker at a partner retreat, at a big practice area retreat, at the big annual, big kickoff meetings that a lot of clients have. Everybody's always in need of climbing up to that next rung in the ladder. And you've given us a really, really great way to be able to do that intentionally, which I really respect. Joanne, this has been a blast. Audience, we're going to put all those links down in the show notes so you can just click away. So go down below if you want those. Joanne, thanks for being on the show. This has been awesome.
Thanks, Mel. This was a great conversation. Really good to be with you.